Hello, everybody. It is 7/9/2020, and welcome to another Level Design Live lecture. Today, what I wanted to do is dive into, because we've just gone over what a level mechanic is and what it means in terms of the player using a core action, trying to validate that through some sort of script, and then responding with some sort of an event, a successful event afterwards, which would make one complete playable level mechanic. And so I wanted to go through just getting those various things set up and try to explain them in the best way or simplest way possible so that it's very easy to take that knowledge and move them to whatever you want the player to do in the project. So I've got the project opened up right now with the toy box scene loaded. Now in week 2, we're doing what's called prototype, and one of the first things that it asks you to do is to not use the default toy box scene, but to make a copy of it. And so whenever we're working in the project, we want to make sure that we're keeping all of our work in its own location, because everyone's starting with the same template. And so mixing things into these template folders will make it much harder to export your stuff at the end of the month. So one of the first things that you need to do when you get into the project is just create a new folder. So I'm going to right click on Assets, create a new folder. This folder is going to have my name on it. So Derek Marinowski. And then this layout, this folder layout, I really do not prefer, because if I have my folder selected, if there's something in the assets folder, I would never see it. I don't know that it's there. If I open these folders, I wouldn't see what's in these folders unless I select them specifically. But if I select the head folders, they might also have assets in them. So it's kind of hard to find what I'm looking for, especially in head folders like that, unless I know exactly where they are. Sometimes when you generate something like a script, for example, it can appear in here. So like a default script you could create in here, but you would never know that it's in the head assets folder unless you knew to click on that folder specifically. So what I like to do is switch this from 2 column to 1 column, and that way I can see all of it together. So I know that inside of the head assets folder there is a script sitting right here, and that's not where I would want it to be. I would want it to be in my folder instead. So you can drag stuff around in here and see them all together. Now, this doesn't give you a preview of what stuff looks like in the same window. So you can always switch back and forth depending on what you're working on. But I just wanted to show you that so you know why my screen looks different. Anywho, so as I said, the prototype starts with the toy box. We need our own copy of it. One of the first parts of the instructions is going to tell you to make a duplicate of it. So I'm going to go into the scenes folder, which has the toy box. I'm just going to right click on this and create actually this version doesn't have a duplicate in there. It's going to be select it, hold Control, and press the D key, and that's going to create a duplicate scene. And then you can just move that into your folder. I'm going to rename it so that I know that it's mine. Get rid of this 1. And then whenever I'm naming things, I always use the naming scheme of putting my initials in front of it, because I think my initials are funny. But also, I know that that is something I've created. Anytime I want to find something that I wrote, I can just search for my initials, and I'll get all of my scripts. I'll get all of my imported materials and assets and all that kind of stuff, as long as I'm using a naming scheme that I recognize. So just another thing that you can do to make this workflow work for you. So inside of this toy box scene, we've got all of the core pieces of the game. There's a character, there's the systems for the game. You can hit play and immediately start playing around in it. And so for this game, the core actions, which are covered inside of the Scraps game design document. It's linked in the welcome activity, as well as in a couple other activities. But the core actions in it are that the player can move. Movement can be tracked by entering a trigger volume or colliding with something. The player can also jump. Jumping can be tracked by if you hit space while inside of a trigger volume. or if you collide with something while falling, you can crouch. So you could check if the player is crouching by checking if they're holding the crouch key, which is C, and you can check that while inside of a trigger volume. You can lift up objects with the grapnel and you can place them into a space, so that you can check that with a trigger volume or with collision. You can also check if they're removed from something. So there's a lot of different things you can do just with collision and triggers, but just knowing how you interact with the game, and then checking during gameplay if something has happened or not. So I wanted to walk through just looking for those various interactions in a script, so you can kind of start picking those, picking up if those happen or not, and then use them when you're creating your level mechanics. So just for the start of this, I'm just going to create an empty object, and this is going to be kind of like a debug object. Let's move my face down here so it's a little easier to see this stuff. This is going to be just kind of like a debug object that I can start with for tracking if the player's doing something or not. So I'm going to go ahead and add a component to this. We're going to say DAM for my script _ and this is going to be I don't know, let's call it core action tracking. Sure, why not? I'm just going to use this as a method for creating a way to check if stuff is happening or not, but this is not going to be the final way that we're going to use it, just to get things going. So I'm going to open up Visual Studio and let's work through this. Okay, so we've got the default script here. I'm going to zoom in on it a little bit so that it's easier to see while we're recording this stuff. The default script gives you the start method and the update method. Start, if you want to check if things have happened as soon as the game starts, then you can do it in there. Update is while the game is running. And so while the game is running, I want to see if the player's doing things. So I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of that first one. And we're going to set up just a couple different methods for seeing if something has happened or not. So if I wanted to check if the player, let's say, jumped or something, I could, let's go create a method, check jump. And inside of here, jumping is when they press the space bar. So I could say if input get key, let's do get key down if they just tap the space bar. The key code is space. This would be if they jumped or not. So we could like send a debug message, debug.log, player jumped. And usually you'd want to do this when they're like inside of a trigger or something like that. I just want to see if I'm getting any sort of feedback or not. So that's if they jump. If you wanted to check if they landed on something, you would do like a collision or something like that, but we'll get into that as we go. Something else I want to check if they crouch or something. So we can say void check crouch. Crouching is if you're holding the C key, so we can say if input get, let's do get key down, key code C. This will be starting a crouch. So if I wanted to check if they've, if I don't want to send like multiple messages, then I would want to do something like track a Boolean or something. So let's say bool crouch message, and I'm going to say false for right now. So if I get key down, I'm going to say crouch message equals true, and then we're going to, right before that, I'm going to send the debug.log crouching. Actually, let's do get key. I don't know why I put an exclamation point there. If we get the C key, I'm going to say if crouch message. There we go. If crouch message is false, then go ahead and send it, because we still want to do it when they're holding it. Then say they are crouching, and then we can check if they release the key afterwards. So if input get key up, key code C, then we will do crouch message equals false. There we go. So if it is false, send it and then set it to true. Crouch message equals true. There we go. Now I won't do it more than once. So this is a way for us to check if they're crouching. This is a way to check if they're jumping. Minimize, and it's going to compile. Okay, and play. Okay, so if I press space, I have to go down here. And let's hide those. Clear. Oh, it's not going to work yet. I have to put it in update. These down here won't run unless we're actually checking it or calling it at some point. So up here in update, I want to say check if we jumped. So we can say check jump. And that'll actually give us that functionality. Check if we crouched. Check crouch. Save. There we go. Compile. I don't know why I closed that. Window. Get that back open. In order to get to the console, go to Window and General and Console. This way you can actually send messages and see them while the game's playing. So now I can see hold crouch. It says I'm crouching, let go of crouch. And that would normally say I'm not crouching, hold it again. Now it says 2. If I jump, I jumped. If you keep hitting it in the air, it's going to keep saying that you've jumped, but we would check it another way. But there you can see the start of checking for input at that point. So that's just debug checking things. Now, if you wanted to do it through a trigger volume, which would make it a little easier to see if they've actually left somewhere, or if you're checking if they've crouched inside of a volume or not, we can go ahead and add a, let's go, box collider, and then set it as a trigger. If we ever wanted to do a volume for something, and let's make this a little easier to see. If you want to do some sort of a trigger volume, you want to make sure you set the layer to ignore raycast. Otherwise, the character is going to kind of hover when they go next to it, and the gravitonal sphere is going to actually go through that volume, or I'm sorry, it's going to bump into the volume rather than go through it. So if you want something that checks if something's happening in a volume but not interacts with the outside world or whatever, you definitely want to set that for like any triggers you're using. So I'm going to go ahead and move this down, and we're going to probably have to make sure that we can see this, but I can turn on gizmos or something. Let's make sure we can actually see it. I'm going to go ahead and give this a, let's make this little debug object into a mesh. So you don't have to ever like create a mesh. We could. I could use this and then maybe add a mesh under it, but you could also add components to this to turn it into something. So if you wanted to add like a mesh filter and make it into a cube or something and then render it, you could definitely do that. Or we could just create an object underneath, so create a cube underneath, remove that collider, and then make this transparent. We have a couple transparent materials in the project, so I'm just going to go in here and say alpha, and then pick like a yellow, so we can actually see through it, and I'll know if we're inside of that space or not. And so I'm going to go ahead and pull this back open, double click, and now that I have a collider that I'm checking if we're within it or not, I can say at the bottom here, we can say void on trigger. Enter is going to be if we're just stepping into it, exit if we're stepping out of it, but stay is kind of like it's kind of like an update, but it's slower than, but we're checking while we're inside of the trigger if something's happening or not. So instead of doing just anywhere, if we've jumped or crouched or something, we can actually cut this and go down to on trigger stay and only check while we're inside of a trigger volume. save that. Then go ahead and hit play. Okay, so outside now, if I jump, there's no message window. Let's go ahead and pull this back up. Console. So yeah, outside, if I jump, nothing happens. If I crouch, nothing happens. But if I go inside of this volume and I jump, it says I jumped. If I crouch, it says I crouched. Now I'm checking whether or not they're doing something in a specific location. And so this same kind of thing, you can now check if they bring something somewhere. So if you wanted to check if a specific object was placed inside of this volume, you could say void on trigger enter, and see if, let's make an object like name something. So we can say, so on trigger enter gets a collider. It puts it into a variable called other. So if I say if other has a name, and so name is a one of the parameters that has, or sorry, game object name. I think it was giving me an error because I didn't finish it out. Name, and we can compare it to, name is a string. So string, any sort of in text with quotes that you want to check for, and we're going to look for a specific object. So let's just call it, I don't know, object, and I'll name it that. So if object enters this, then we can say debug.log, object is here. And so this you can use for tracking if the player is here, if a gravinal object is here, we can say if other name, we can say player. Actually, it's got a tag called player. Let's use tags. So tags are a in-engine way for you to kind of give something a second name. So tag here at the top. I don't recommend using tag for your personal things because tags do not export from the project if you use like a package. So if you use a Unity package and you export it, none of these tags may exist in the project that you import them into. And so you're gonna have to re-tag everything. So I'm gonna show you a trick for kind of setting that up, so you don't have to worry about things being tagged or untagged or something like that. But in here we can check if it's the player and then say debug.log, player is here. And this also works for on exit. So same idea, we can say void on trigger exit. Copy these, so if object or player head out, we can say object has left, and dots for sadness. Okay, test it again. Cool, so box, window, general, console. So while that's open, we can then walk in here and it's gonna say like, hey, the player is here, the player has left. I can go, the player is here, and then I can jump. And you're just tracking the things that are happening in the game, but in a specific spot. So this is very useful for if you wanted to make your own type of like pressure plate, or like a weak floor maybe, and you wanted to track how long the player's been in a certain space, or how many objects you've placed in a certain space. A lot of different things you can do just by verifying these little either input or triggers or collision or any of that kind of stuff. So let's look at collision as well, because I want to make sure I do that. I'm going to make that a separate object. This way I can check if the player like jumped off of it or something like that. I'll take this one and put it, this debug one. So something I want to cover because I just did it. And if you hold control while you move objects, they'll snap to the grid. If you hold V, like for Victor, it'll go to the corners, and holding V will let you snap corners to corners or vertices to vertices, which is going to allow you to keep things nice and tidy and make sure you don't have any holes in your geometry. This thing. Okay, so this outside part doesn't have a, okay, cool. So trigger volume, collision. I'm gonna go ahead and add this same core action tracking to this cube over here. Add, actually, just drag it. Once again, this script is not something you would use like as a final script, but this is me showing the various ways that you can check for things, like if something's happened or not. So let's do, we're just gonna check for collision on this one. So down here we can say void on collision, enter. So something ran into me, right? And then we can do like who hit, or we can check for a specific one. So if this is different, so it collects an event called collision. It stores it in this variable. If you go to collision and then a dot after it and look for specifically the first collider, that'll be the first one that hit this object. So collider, and then we can say if this has a tag that is player, then the player collided. So debug.log player collided. And then we can do the same thing down here. Copy, but change this to exit. And so this says the something stopped colliding. And if it was the player has stopped colliding. There we go. Save. We can do the same thing as look for like object and stuff like that. I want to start showing like more advanced ways to track the stuff. So play. So there's a box. If I run into the box, it's going to say the player collided. And when I walk away from the box, it says player stopped colliding. So you can check if they're bumping into something or walking away from something. Let's clear this and stop collapsing it. So running into it and then stopped colliding. If I jump on it, same idea. I collided and then I stopped colliding. So if I collide with it, and then I check if they jumped, I could check if they've jumped off of this object. Or I could check on stay, did they try to jump? And so let's do, in here we can say void on collision stay. So while we're currently colliding, I'm doing here and be like something is currently colliding. If it's the player, I can then check if they jumped off of it. So the way that we had checked for jump is doing spacebar. So here, I'm just going to copy that and go down here. So something is currently colliding. Did they press the space key? The player jumped, but we're going to say the player jumped off of this. Or we can put its name maybe. Jumped off of. Here's a way that you can kind of personalize your debug message. Jumped off of, I'm going to leave a space and then say plus, and then say this dot name. So the name of this object, whatever it's called, that's what we're jumping off of. And so this is a way that we can see if we're on something and then we, left it. It'll be good for if you ever wanted like an object where it was like a spring, so you're on it and then you jumped off of it. There it said player jumped off of cube. This may still give you the same from here, jumped off of cube, because I'm like bumped into it. But those are things you can slowly verify and change based on how you want it to function. So let's go ahead and start, now that we see like the various ways of checking if the player is doing something, let's go ahead and show it in other ways instead of just debug messages going to a console. So I'm going to go ahead and remove these components that I have. Actually, let's leave these here. These are our debug objects. And then I'm just going to make a new object, and I'm going to show the same stuff we're doing, but let's evolve it a little bit. So let's make an object. This is going to be our, in my mind, I currently, because I was doing the jumping on something, let's do like a spring, like in Sonic or something like that. So let's go spring object. And then this spring object, this is the pivot point. I'm going to go ahead and give it a little icon so it's easier to see. So this spring object, if you go up here to the top, when you have something selected on the inspector, you can swap this to either a named, icon like that, or you can give it just like a little, symbol or something, whatever works for you. I'm going to do a little red diamond for these objects. And so that way, even if there's nothing on that object, I still know where it is. So that's my spring object. And then to make this work, I need something to jump on. So let's go, I've got Pro Builder open, so let's create, actually I'm gonna make an empty object under here first, I think. I don't know what to do it. No, let's just go ahead and create it. I'm gonna create the top of it, top of the spring. So let's go new shape and make like a cylinder. And let's turn that on so I can see this. So there's a cylinder, but let's make it to the size of the player. So the player, we have a character right here, but moving this character can cause problems, as it says it's underneath this thing that says do not edit. So if you ever want to make something to the player's scale, we have another tool you can use. So underneath the Scraps Tools folder, you can actually pop this open and get access to a whole bunch of stuff that we give you access to. One of those things is the player size, which is like a complete duplicate of the character, but now you can kind of put it wherever you want. So I'm gonna take this spring object now and just snap this like down to where the feet are. So let's do one of these corners maybe. It's the corner of that. So let's go corner here, control, so I can see it. And then I'm gonna place this player size like right above it, so we can kind of build with this in mind. Okay, that's the spring object, and then I'm going to create underneath it new shape, cylinder. This cylinder is going to be, right underneath the player. So move it over. I'm using the grid on the ground to try and get this closer. You can also hold V and snap this to corners. I currently have pivot set and pivots off to the side of this. You can definitely switch your transform mode from pivot to center, and then move this around as if the pivot point was on the center. Like you could put this underneath another object, so a spring object, for example, and then set its position to 0, 0, 0. Actually, that's not going to move it from center, but to try and get something to be closer to where you want it to be. But yeah, I can move it from center and then try to, it's still going to snap from there, so that's not really going to work, but control will move it there. Scaling from center would be fun, but yeah, that's not going to work for what I want to do right now. So I'm going to currently set this to be the scale that I want. You should always construct objects to be the scale that you want and not scale it afterwards. If you're using the scale tool to modify something, keep in mind that can cause issues with if you have any sort of object hierarchies. So parent-child relationships, if you have something that's scaled on the top, it scales all of the children as well. And having multiple different like transform information, scale, rotation, etc., can cause things to warp when they move or animate. Okay, so I'm going to change the radius here to, let's go like 2. 2 is huge. Let's go 1. 1's still big. Let's go 0.8, 7, 6. That looks good. Okay, so this is going to be the outside of the spring here. I'm going to center the pivot point. So right now it's on the corner. Let's go down to the Pro Builder tools and say center pivot. And I'm going to put it under spring object and 0, 0. Okay, so that's right there where the bottom is. But I don't want this to be on the bottom. I want it to be kind of up a little bit, like here. Because then I can have like some sort of something underneath it. but right now I'm not really worried about that. Okay, so this object, remember the collision thing, if I bumped into the side of it, it's still registered. So what I want to do is not have this be the only piece, but I'm actually going to create a duplicate of it, and we'll change the size of it so it's a little smaller. So let's do duplicate. And this will kind of give it a cool look to it as well, but I want to make sure that if I'm bumping into the outside one, it's not going to change the, what am I trying to say? Change the way this functions, I guess. So I'm going to set this now to center, and now I can scale this. When you're using Pro Builder and you select faces and then scale, it'll actually modify the mesh itself, which is good. Instead of changing the entire object, which will kind of warp the textures. I'm going to give it like a little bit of a bump maybe, and then go to object mode and just kind of embed this right on here. So maybe make this a little bigger, a bit bigger, edges and down like that. So if I jump on top here, I should get that collision message. Okay. So this is the object I wanted to actually collide with. So let's go ahead and say this is bounce pad, I guess. And this will be spring edge, sure. And so this pad thing is what I'm going to jump onto. So let's make it look a little different. Inside of your tools folder, there's a materials folder. I'm going to pop this open. This is where I got that transparent material from earlier. So we've got different alpha materials, which are the transparent ones. There's different prop materials, structures, things like that. I'm going to go ahead and mark this bounce pad as a dynamic object, just dragging the material right into the mesh renderer material slot. And now it's like this orange color. And I'm going to drag a different one to the outside one. So I'm going to do this, the collectible one, just so we see something different. So we got a yellow on the outside, orange on the inside, and there's the start of this object. And so on the debug object, I used this parent as where I put the script. If we're checking for collision or triggers, it has to be on the object that has the trigger or collider. So this bounce pad is going to have its own check for collision. So I'm going to add a component here. PAM, we'll call this bounce pad. Open that up when it actually compiles. Any moment now. That's fine. Okay. Save that. So bounce pad, the goal of this is I want the player to, let's check if player is colliding, check if player jumps off. And then when they jump off, I want to add extra force in jump direction, which is going to make them jump higher. So the first thing I'm going to do is check if they're colliding. So we can do that as say void on collision, not enter, but I'm going to say stay. So if they're currently staying in the collider. So if collision collider tag is the player, we can say player is colliding. Check if they jump off. So here we can say if input get key down key code, sorry, not in string, key code space, then jumped off. And if they jumped off, then we should, this is where we're checking if they jumped off. Check if they're colliding, then we checked Players colliding, comma, check if they jump off. They jumped off, and then add extra force in a direction. And so the player's got a rigid body, and if we take the rigid body and just add extra up, momentum, then they'll jump higher. So we can say, let's make our own like custom thing for this, I think. Actually, no, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna add the force here, and then we're gonna make like a function specifically or a method specifically for all the feedback that I want to give saying that this is happening. So player is colliding. This is currently the player collision.collider. So here I need to first, if we're gonna add force, we need to get the player's rigid body component, which is gonna be, let's say rigid body. I'm gonna say RB equals, we're gonna make a custom local variable for this. Let's say collision.collider.get component. We don't have to check if it's a player again because we're already here. So get the component. My head's gonna be in the way. Get out of here. Rigid body. Okay, so we're getting the rigid body. And once we get it, then we're gonna add force. So cut this and move it down because we can't add force until we have it. There, add force in a direction. RB, add force. Then it's gonna ask you what direction and how much do you wanna do. So I know we're gonna go up. So I'm gonna say, actually, I wanna make it so it'll go in any direction that I have this pad rotated. So we're gonna get our specific up direction. Because if we rotate it, our up would be kind of diagonal. So let's say transform dot up. So that'll get my up axis in world space. And then we're going to change how much by multiplying it. So if I want to multiply a specific amount of force, I should make a variable. So up here we can say how strong is this pad, and then let's make a variable. So float pad strength equals, I don't know, I'm gonna put 100 for right now, I guess. 100F because it's a float. Down here, up times pad strength. And then if you put a comma after this, it'll have a force mode. This can change how force is applied to the object. I'm just going to make this into a, you have an instant velocity change ignoring the mass. You've got an instant force to push through the rigid body using the mass. Continuous force using the mass. I'm going to do velocity change and just have that work. So immediately we have this script that checks if the player is currently colliding with something, check if they've pressed space, and then once we've done that, give them some sort of a response, right? So I'm going to go ahead and minimize that and hit play. Okay, so there's the pad. If I jump onto it, hold on one second, I want to make sure it's, I don't have any debug message at the moment. So I'm on it. If I hit space, I go real high, right? So that's us verifying that the player is on it. I'm going to go ahead and put those print messages back in here. So on stay, the player is here. So I'm going to say, I don't want to have like repeating messages, but for right now I can collapse them. So we'll go debug.log, player is colliding. Then down here, jumped off, we're going to say debug.log, player has jumped, and then send them in a direction. So pad was really strong. If I want to modify the pad strength on the inspector, I should just, instead of setting this to public, because public is if you want other things to be able to see this as well, I just want this to be modifiable on the inspector. So we're just going to do serialized field. Save. That way I can tweak it. Minimize. Okay, so that's going to pop up over here. Okay, add strength. Let's go like 6 or 5 even, something simple. So the pad, strength 5, play. Okay. And then we can do a window. I hit, by the way, I hit tab to bring the mouse out while I'm currently playing. So I can go back to window and console. So there's my console. I'm going to go ahead and say collapse again because we're going to print this message a whole bunch. So on it, it says player is colliding, jump, player is jumped. So boom, regular jump. And we've got this jump, right? Bigger jump. And then, like I said, if I rotate it, it's going to shoot me in a different direction. So if I take this spring object and I rotate it, it's sideways, and hit play. Okay, so I'm on it and then jump and I go sideways. Now the player kind of slows down immediately when you do that. So you may want to, when you do like a sideways thing, alter this to work a little differently so that they fly a little further. But you get the idea. So this is just validation, and then I'm doing something with the player. Like pushing the player away is good, but it doesn't really look like it's a spring. It's not actually doing anything. So in order to sell the fact that you've validated what's happened and give them some sort of a positive reaction or an event to it, you want to add some things like animation and sound and any of that kind of stuff. So if the player has jumped on this thing, I want it to look like it's pressed down, and then when I jump off of it, I want it to go back up. So we can actually do that by just checking if they've entered and if they've exited. So this is, if we're staying, we can go void on collision enter. Check if it's the player. So if collision collider tag is the player, they're here. So we can say, instead of players colliding here over and over, player is has started collision, I guess. And then we can do down here, copy, paste, player has exit, there we go, has left on collision exit. I put this inside of something, didn't I? I totally did. So you can't put a method inside of another method. So you want to make sure you watch these lines so that you're not embedding the wrong thing in the wrong spot. Paste. Okay, so on exit, they've left collision. And then on stay, I checked, here if they're still in it, then check if they're jumping or whatnot. So I'm doing something that you really shouldn't do, which is check for input inside of a on trigger stay or an on collision stay. We should really do that in update to make sure that it is something I had said earlier was on trigger stay is slower than update, and so it may not happen when you want it to. It can be inconsistent. So instead of doing on collision stay here, what I'm going to do is say void update. And then we're going to just make a variable for if the player is on this or not. So here we can say bool is here equals false. And then on if they entered, we're going to say is here is true. And go down, is here equals false. So if they enter, they are here. If they exit, they're not here anymore. And then we can check in here. We'll say if is here is true, then we're going to do this other stuff. Now, this doesn't exist in update. So I'm going to have to store the player when they get here in order to talk to them in update. So we're going to go ahead and make a variable for that. I'm going to say, let's just do game object player. And then when they enter, I'm going to grab the player. So I'm going to, let's do player is the game object I just created. It's up here, player. Or let's call it player geo so I know which one it is. So player game object is going to equal this thing. Dot game object. There you go. That'll store the player. Say store the player for later. And then all of this I can move. So I'm going to just do Control X to cut. We're going to get rid of stay entirely. Now you have enter and exit. In update, which is happening, over time, paste that in here. If the player is currently here, which means that they're colliding currently, check if they hit space, send a message that they did hit space. Then we need to store the rigid body. Collision collider doesn't exist anymore, but player geo does. So player geo is the stored player from when they entered the collision. So now we store the rigid body and add force as usual. So there, now it's doing it through updates. And then we have these is here, is not here, that we can use later for checking if something's on this spring or not. So yeah, if something's on this or not, we're gonna tell another component to react to it. So I'm gonna go ahead and close this tracking thing and minimize this. And then let's make this more spring-like. And right now I'm doing all in one object, but this object has many pieces to it. And so if you wanted something to be, if you wanted like the player to interact with something, but then it interacts with a completely different object, you just store it. You just put it into a variable. So I'm gonna do the same thing by creating a different object or having a different object control something else, I guess, is what I want to say. So edge and bounce pad, I'm going to create an empty here. And I'll call this empty. Let's move this down. I'm going to call this empty anim because this is going to control all of my animation for this object. And then everything I want to control with this anim object is going to go underneath it. So I'm going to create an empty underneath this. I'm going to call this one spring top, which is this edge and bounce pad. Spring top, I'm going to move this up to where this is. So it's kind of in the center of these two. Then take edge and bounce pad and put them underneath spring top. And the reason why is so now I can move this down if I want to. There's the first part of that. And I'm going to put something else underneath this to be the base. So create a new cylinder. I'm going to put this under anim. Let's go ahead and make this. Just going to start with that size. Let's actually go a little smaller, so like 4. There we go, something like that. Build it. Let's center that pivot. And then we'll center this underneath this object. So 0, 0, 0. Under spring object. You're inside of that one. Okay, so spring object is currently at the top. That's fine. So I'm going to take the spring object here. I see what's happening. So I still have center selected, and so it's giving me the center of all the objects. If I switch this to pivot, it's down here at the bottom again. So this is the pivot point. Anim is here at the pivot point. Spring top is up here at the top. Cylinder here is currently over here. There you go, center. So I want to make sure that I change this to the center of this object because it's not inside of this. 0, 0, 0. There it is. And now we can just move it up a little bit so it's on top. And maybe we can make it a little taller. I don't want to worry too much about making this perfect for the video, but at least getting something going. So let's do something like here. And then, yeah, I can move this top down a little bit afterwards. So there's the bottom. We'll call this one spring bottom. Because I don't need that one to animate. I just need this stuff to animate. The animator is going to control spring top. I can put, actually I'll put bottom under here anyways, but spring top and bottom, but I'm only going to animate this part. Unless I wanted to maybe squish the bottom a little bit or something like that. Something I can do later. So bottom, I'm gonna give that a different material. I'm gonna use prop, I don't know, static, neutral. Sure, that'll be fine. So here's my spring, or actually let's do like something that stands out a little bit cool. Yeah, that's gonna have to stay. Okay, so there's my spring. And so I want this to, it's still gonna work, still gonna do what I want it to do, but I want it to animate when I interact with this, because functionality-wise, everything works, it just doesn't look like it's doing anything. So let's give it some sort of visual change to it. So on this anim object, which has nothing on it, I want it to control all of the child objects on here. So anim, we're gonna add an animator. In this animator, we're gonna just go to, and notice everything's still spawning down here in the assets folder. So that's why I like this view, because at some point I'm gonna put these back in my folder. The same thing is gonna happen. I'm going to animate this and it's gonna generate a controller, and the controller is gonna be in the head assets folder. So let's go window, animation. And so I know that you do, or have done like a wind turbine and things like that before. Some of you, it may have changed since the last time I've looked at the class, but you've done some sort of animation. So this should be familiar to you, the idea of creating like different states, like an idle state, moving from one idle state to another idle state, creating a door, that kind of stuff. So this, no different. We're going to create, I'm going to say spring idle up. Spring idle up is going to be just what it does right now. So here I have the ability to add a property, and then to use either this transform is the animator object, is the thing here at the top. I don't want that. I want spring top. So add spring top, transform, position. And that's it. That's our idle. If I then go here and create a new clip, the new clip is going to be called spring idle. I'm going to do down. Okay, same idea. Add a property, spring top, transform, position, but I'm going to move it down a bit. So let's do, actually the way that I'm doing this, if I move the spring, oh no, that's actually, it's gonna be a cool thing. Something's gonna happen that's gonna show something else I wanna show. So I'm gonna keep going. There's gonna be a weird bug and then we're gonna fix it. So this one down, I need to move it to its down position. So right now, it's not where that would be. I need to record this, so record. And then I need to make sure I'm moving spring top. So move spring top down until I see this thing kind of come through it, so like there. This is gonna make it still go up at the end. I wanna copy this keyframe, so select it, copy, go down to the end, and then Control V to paste. And now I have the idle here at the ground. So I have the top and I have the bottom. Now I just need the transitions between the two. It's gonna be the same as if you saw like the like a diamond for the transition states of like opening a door. So I'm gonna create another one, spring. I'm gonna say up. Let's say up to down. And then we're gonna change, not sure why it switched videos. There you go. Pin this video. Pin, there you go. Not that I don't wanna see your picture. I just wanna make sure that I'm still talking on here. Anywho, so, mess that up. All right, so up to down, we're gonna start with the up position and then go to the down position. So I've already animated those. If I add this property here, if I change top and say transform in position, this is up. If I wanted to then get down, I could just switch to idle down, select this keyframe, Control C to copy, switch back over to up to down, and then here I'm up, go all the way to the end, Control V, now I'm down, and now it'll go down. Then if I wanted to switch this and do the other way, I can do create a new clip. I'm going to say spring down to up, add a property, top, transform, position, and now here's up on both sides. I still have down copied though. So here at the front, Control V, now it's down to up when I get off of it. So I have 4 animation states that I can now chain together. So if I select anim and go to the animator window, there's our 4 states. Just like a door, we're going to pair them up so that we start with idle up. Let's go down here, start with idle up. We're gonna go, we'll put idle down here. We're gonna go up to down. So go up to down and then down to up. Actually, let's go clockwise. No, I think this is how it's shown to you normally. So, so up to down is gonna go to, or sorry, up is gonna go to up to down is gonna go to idle down, then idle down is gonna go down to up, and then down to up, back to idle up. And there we have our animated spring. So if we go ahead and hit play, you're gonna see it just rapidly going up and down. But it shows you that it's, you know, it's working now. So there's our animation for our spring working. You can still jump on top of it and jump off, and that'll work. But I wanna make sure that we do this only when the player jumps on it. So in order to talk to another component, we need to store it. So here, let's go ahead and store animation or animator. So I'm going to say animator component, anim, I'm going to call it. Actually, I'm going to say animator just straight up because I know that other scripts, it'll say anim. I want to make sure that everyone knows that you can name it however you want. There's no specific way you need to name it or not, as long as you understand what is stored in that object. And then you're supposed to name things like with a certain case capitalization. So camel case, lowercase at the very front word, and then every other word, capital letter. That's for variables specifically. So this is the animator that I'm storing. And then I'm going to tell the animator to set a value when the player enters and when the player exits. And so since we have 2 things, whether or not they're on it and whether or not they're off of it, I can use a Boolean for that and switch between the 2. So let's go ahead and store that as well. Store animator parameter, and the parameter that we're going to store is going to be a Boolean. Actually, we don't need to store the, yeah, I want to use the parameter's name. So let's say string parameter name, whatever it is. Now I can't edit these on the inspector unless I serialize field. And once you put that on both of them, then we can assign an animator and we can assign a parameter. Because if you use, or we can assign a parameter name like a string. And so you can't use get component from this object and get the animator because there's no animator on this spring, or sorry, on the spring top, right? Or on, not even spring top, is the thing down here. So bounce pad. Bounce pad is all the way at the bottom, and animator is all the way up here. So the only way we can get that animator is to store it. And so to do that, I've exposed these variables. Now we can just drag anim into that animator slot, and there, now we're talking to that specific animator instead. And then the parameter name that I'm going to talk to, I haven't created yet, so let's go ahead and do that. Animator. In order for this to move, I'm going to go here for parameters and create a Boolean, and I'm going to say is on pad. And so is on pad, if that's true, then somebody is on the pad. If it's false, nobody's on the pad. Is on pad is the parameter name, so down here I'm going to name the same thing. Is on pad, so we're talking to that one. And then here in our transitions, I'm going to go idle up. Cannot go to down until something's on it. So from up to down here, conditions, we're going to add is on pad is true. which is going to allow it to go here. And then in order to move from down up, we're going to go here and change this one to the other one. So add is on pad, false. So if it's currently down and somebody gets off of it, then it's going to go back to up. So this means that if I jump off of it, it's going to go up. If I walk off of it, it's going to go up. And so when I do that, if it's currently idle, idle has right now some time that it plays through. I'm going to make this so that it does not play the remainder of the idle and instead immediately goes to the next animation. So here it has exit time, just uncheck that. Same thing down here, uncheck that so that it just jumps immediately to the next animation. So now that we have that set up, we just need to talk to that specific, that parameter. So script, go down here, and when I enter, it says is here is true. I'm gonna then tell the animator to set that. So let's go tell animator to set bool parameter to true. And so we'll say animator, which is what we stored it as, put a dot after it. We're looking for set bool. Set bool, if you open this with a parenthesis, it'll say that it takes an ID and a value, but it's one of two different ways you can write this. So if you click down, it'll say string and value. Sounds good. I'm going to, instead of naming the parameter with this and being like my bool name or whatever, I'm going to use the variable I've stored. The variable that I stored is right here, parameter name. So I'm just going to put that here, parameter name, and then put a comma. And then I need to give it a value. I have a value, it's here. Is here is true, right? So I can say is here, and then set it here. Or I can just always set this on, update if I wanted to. So like here, I'm setting it in two different places. If I did it here and here. But I could also just set this one time in update if it changes. And so it's just another way you can do it. I'm going to leave those here for now so we see that on collision exit, that's when we set it. But we're setting it to the value of this Boolean. So is here equals false, then this sets it to false. Save. Okay, so there's the beginnings of showing some sort of animation with this. Cool. So pad, if I jump onto it, it goes down. Oh, it goes down and then up. And this is the bug I was talking about, is that when it moves down, the player's kind of falling with it, which is causing it to think that the player got off. So it doesn't always work. But something that you're going to want to do if you want to create something that moves the player with it is actually parent the player to this thing when it moves. So this animation here, I want to parent the player to actually the top of the spring. So I'm going to go ahead and on spring top, I'm going to add a, let's do like maybe like a capsule. This is kind of capsule shape, so maybe a capsule collider or a sphere or something. Capsule collider, maybe. I'm not sure if that'll do what I want it to do. Kind of, sort of. This is just enough space to get the player in here. But I could use a sphere for that. So let's go add sphere collider. There we go. And so the idea is while the player is standing on this thing, if it moves, I want the player to move with it. So spring top, I'm going to set this as a trigger. I'm going to change the layer to ignore raycast. Now there is children, so it's going to say, do you want to set the children to also be that layer? No, I don't. I want them to collide with those objects, but ignore raycast on this trigger right here. So I'm going to say, no, this object only. And then if the player is within this, I want them to go with it. So we do have some things in the project that can help you out with this. Some of them, I believe this one's a little old, so it should work for the player specifically, but if you want to check for your own objects and stuff, you may want to write your own. I'm going to check if this one works, and then I'm going to show you how to write it afterwards. So inside of Scraps Tools, there's a scripts folder. Inside of that, there's a couple different scripts that are already here, such as like sleeping a rigid body so they stay still until you poke it, or using objectives or collectibles and things like that. There's a lot of stuff that's in here. Collectibles are already made for you. Objectives are something you have to write, so it depends on what you're trying to do with it. But the scripts folder exists and has some things in here that might be useful to you. The one I'm going to use is this parenter volume thing. So on this spring top, I'm just going to assign parenter volume to that. And then instead of maximizing when I get on here, I'm going to leave this uncheck maximize so I can see this spring top and hit play. And so what this parenter volume does is take whatever collided with it and parent it to it. So when I jump onto it, you'll see the player is now a child of it. Oop, no, it's still doing it. I need to change something else on there. So here the player is now a child of the spring top. And if I jump off of it, then I'm not a child anymore. And so that's how you can make something move the player. So like I'm on this object now. If I move it on the X, the player will stay with it. And so they can actually like kind of ride it wherever you move the object. But it's still moving this object when I don't want it to. So let's go back into animator. So when I'm idle up, I'm telling it to move down. I said no exit time, and then it goes to up to down. And then that should immediately start playing to idle down. When we get to idle down, I don't want to move forward until that is false. So something is happening that's causing it to immediately switch to the other one. It seems like it's when I leave the collision. So this should not be changing that. Those are there. But maybe I want to do this in update instead. So I'm going to go cut here instead. Just set the bool parameter. So it's going to set it based on whatever the value is here as on it. Just see what that does. And this little debugging inside of this video is good. So we're just going to set it in update to see if that is telling it to go to the right one. And I'm going to leave this animator open, I think, so we can track it. So pop this window out, and then we can hit play. Let's select this object specifically, anim. So now this will show us that it's actually running on that one. And then I can see if I'm on the object. Yeah, it seemed like it flickered in and out for a second, like I left collision for a moment. So maybe collision's the wrong one. Maybe that's not what I want to use. Because yeah, it seems like if I move forward slightly, I think the player is falling, and that's causing it to react again. So instead of collision, I might want to do a trigger for that instead. And that's totally fine. So like instead of doing collision on this spring, this bounce pad here, I want to change this so that it's checking for if I've entered a trigger volume or not. So this right now is using a mesh collider, and it's a pretty flat, thin looking thing. The spring top, we put like a sphere on it. Sphere is a little big for what I want, but maybe I can put like a box that's just basically the size of what I'm looking for. As long as there's, it for the most part fills this space that I'm checking. So on bounce pad, I'm gonna go ahead and add, down here we go, add component, and let's do a box collider. And this box collider is now kind of outside of this thing, so we're gonna pull it in a little bit. Let's go center this box collider. Okay, 0, 0. And this is 1, 2, 1. So let's change this to like 0.7, 0.75, and 0.75 maybe. There we go. So it's just kind of inside of this. Make it this is going to be a trigger, but I'm on an object that I'm colliding with, so I may have to change which object I'm using as the bounce pad, but that's totally fine. So let's go ahead and just adjust this and say I'm going to move this up a little bit like that. So that's the trigger I want to stand in while I'm on this thing. So I'm going to make an empty object underneath bounce pad real quick. empty. We're going to call this bounce pad trigger. And I'm going to copy over the stuff that I want. So I know that I want this script. So instead of setting all of these values back up, what I can do is go to this little gear and copy component, then go to the trigger, go to the gear, paste component is new, and now it still has all of those things stored. Go back to pad, remove bounce pad script from here, and then get this box collider, copy this component, go to the trigger, paste this component as new, and now it's the same, same trigger and everything. I'm gonna go ahead and say is trigger and then set this one layer to ignore raycast. Back to bounce pad, remove this box collider, boom. Now I have a little trigger volume instead to see if the player is actually in it. So when this thing moves, it's not gonna disconnect the player from it for any reason. So now that I have a trigger, I probably didn't need a special central bounce pad thing, but just working through bugs and trying to see what's going on. So there it is on here, bounce pad. There's the original mesh. So in the trigger, the script here, I need to switch it from using collision to using a trigger instead. So here on collision enter, we're gonna change this to on trigger enter, which is a collider other instead. So here, we're just gonna change collision collider to other. And then here, collision collider to other. And there, now I'm checking if they're in a trigger or not. Down here, collision exit, same idea. On trigger exit, collider, other, storing the collider, other, tag player, now they've left. It's not a collision anymore, rather, but has started or has entered trigger, has left trigger. There we go, save. And now they're not gonna constantly move up and down. Same idea though, it's still setting the parameter and that kind of stuff. So switch back over, trigger, let's test it. Maximize, play. Cool. So if you jump on it, it's gonna go down, it's gonna stay down while I'm on it. And if I walk off of it, it's gonna go back up. Cool. Back on, it's down, and then I jump, it goes higher. So the animation isn't fast enough, you can tweak it. So we can go back into the animator, window, animation, animator. And then on here, if I wanted to go really quickly down, I can just change up to down to be 2 times the speed, so change speed to 2. Then down to up, let's go, I don't know, 3 times, let's go faster. Just for the heck of it. Play. Cool. And so jump on it, goes down. So there's a little hiccup in there, so I'm gonna have to change how it blends, and then we can jump off of it. It comes back up. So if we go back and look at the animator, and we've got these transitions in here, these are causing that weird hiccup. So what I'm gonna do is just have it play all the way through, sorry, this one specifically. I'm gonna have it play all the way through the down before it switches to the next animation. So here we can see the transition up to down, and then this is the blend. So you can go up here to settings and just say exit time. 0 would be none, 1 would be all of it. And then we can blend, or we can say no blend, no transition. Just flat, finish the animation and be done. And I'm gonna do the same for over here. So settings, exit time 1, no blend. And now it'll play much faster and not have a weird hiccup. Jump on it, it goes down, jump off. Kind of hard to see it go back up, but if I jump on it and it goes down, I can walk off and it's just go right back up. Here we go. So that's, animation, and I've done debug messages, but I'm gonna go ahead and add one of our other tools in here to give feedback, which is the message system. And so in order to talk to the message system, there are singletons that are available. Singleton is the idea of creating a variable that's global, that there's ever only going to be one of. And so there's a specific way to access these. These are all part of that Scraps game design document. So if you go in there and you look at the message system section, it'll show you how to talk to it. But just in here, when I enter and leave, I want to give some feedback to say that the spring is changing. So when I've entered here, for example, I'm going to say, let's go Scraps underscore message system. Okay. Put a period after it, and we're going to say instance, another one, and then the function or method we're going to use is called new message. In here, it takes somebody said it, so there's something that said something. What did they say, the body, and then there's a formatting at the end of it. So I'm just going to have the system send a message, so it really doesn't matter who says it. I can put like this object's name, so let's say this.name. So whatever this object's name is, we're going to say the spring, what are we calling it, bounce pad, the bounce pad lowers. So we got some sort of feedback, comma, and so I did comma space, and it's immediately giving me this this drop-down menu here that points automatically to the message type variable. So I'm going to just use that, and then go down to here, put a period after it, and you see bad emote standard system. So bad is going to color it red and be like this is like an error message or a failure. Emote is like if any of you play World of Warcraft or any other games that they use like emotes where they don't use the name of the character in the front of the chat message, but it'll say like you did this or something. So like you danced. So we could do like an emote. We could do a standard message where it just uses the name at the front, or system will say system, and it'll be like a gold message. I'm actually going to use emote because it'll say just that message. So it'll say the bounce pad lowers, and it'll be kind of just like a gray message. So there's me sending a message for if something happens, and then I'm going to copy this. Actually, I can make this a lot easier to write just for a fun little side thing to add to this video. If you don't want to write all of that message stuff again, you could make like your own function, say void spring message, let's say, or spring emote, sure, spring emote, and we'll go string emote text. Then down here, we could paste all of this stuff that we had before, but then here in the middle, change this to emote text. Now I don't have to write all that stuff again, and you can make your other stuff cleaner. So whatever the emote text is, so like this whole line here, we could say spring emote. We entered, so the bounce pad lowers. There we go. Much shorter spring emote, bounce pad lowers, and then down here on exit, spring emote, the bounce pad springs up. There we go. So there's some sort of visual feedback for these things happening. Cool. Do I jump on it? My messages are behind this thing. So it says on here, the bounce pad lowers, just as a plain message. And then if I walk off, the bounce pad springs up. So I've got a visual message that says something's happening. And, when I jump off of it, bounce pad springs up. When I actually jump, let's have the player say something. So spring emote, we can do void player message, sure. So I don't have to see all that stuff up there. Message. Just cleaning up code because this thing's long. So if I copy all of this and paste it in here, instead I'm going to say scrapper, which is the character, and whatever they're saying. So I'm going to put MSG here. And then here at the end, we're going to change this dot to standard. There we go. So this will be whatever the player says. Save it. And now if I call player message and put a message in there, it'll put it in here and call the rest of that. So we can clean up here at the top. So if I jump while I'm in there, I'm going to make them respond. So we can say player message, sure, why not? Back out, play. Okay, jump onto it, lowers, springs up, lowers, so the player says something, bounce pad springs up. Yeah, you can get a visual feedback through text. Let's do another bit of feedback. So when this springs up, I'm going to throw some sort of a particle to show that maybe like dust or something is being kicked out. This will be real kind of quick and dirty. But underneath the bounce pad, let's go ahead and create, actually this is going to be under not animation, but maybe create an empty here. And we'll call this, I don't know, effects, because I can put sound effects and visual effects and everything underneath here. So let's go create I'm gonna right click on this and go effects and particle system. Particle systems by default kind of just go in a direction. So right now it's kind of traveling that way, which is not what I want. I want it to go up. So I'm gonna rotate this. Usually particle systems come in with the -90 on the X, so it's going up immediately. But because I right-clicked and created it, it created it with no rotation. So this particle system is going up right now. What I want to do is have it kind of kick dust out. So later on, or rather I have other videos where I go into very specifically how to make a particle system work. I'm just going to do something quick for this so we have the ability to make a particle react. So right now it's just always emitting. I don't want it to always emit. I only want it to emit when I tell it to. So we're going to do, let's go ahead and do lifetime. I'm going to make this shorter, so particles are going to die a lot sooner, like over here-ish or something. I don't want them to go up in the air. I want them to go kind of out, like away from it, because it's going to be like when like Mario hits the ground and then dust goes out. So I'm going to change the shape of this from a cone to a circle. There we go. So now they go out on the ground. And then we're going to change it so it's all at the same time. So instead of emission over time, we're going to say 0 to that. So let's add a burst. And a burst is going to all happen at the same time, like that. And then we're going to change that burst to be slower. And then I'm also going to, with that, make them bigger over time. So let's go to size over lifetime. But we want the size to be much bigger than that. So let's go start size, like 10, 0 to 10. There we go, now we got dust. Let's kick that lifetime higher so they last a little longer. But I want them to slow down when they're moving away from where I have them starting. So I'm going to go minimize this top one. We're going to do a limit velocity over lifetime. And then we're going to dampen it by like half. Still not what I want. I want force instead. That should be right, but not 5, I guess, maybe like 8. Still not seeing a difference. Oh, it's because we're using speed instead of velocity. So what I need to do is switch this. Instead of doing speed here, say 0 on speed, and then go velocity over lifetime. And velocity over lifetime, we're going to do world space and let's do a random between 2 constants. So you can do a random, so you can send them in both directions, or in all directions rather. So if I'm in here and I'm like, I want to go out on like X and Z, but I also want to go negative X, negative Z. Still not doing what I want it to do. That's also doing it randomly, which is weird. Definitely want to limit velocity over lifetime, but I also want it to be all consistent. So maybe there's something else I'm missing here. Dampened by, if I put 1 on here. Drag 1. There we go. That's better. So that seems to just immediately stop it there. So let's go 0.5 on the speed, maybe. 0 on the speed. Does that just make it stop in the middle? Yeah, kind of does. So let's go 1 on the speed and 0.5 on the dampen. There we go, better. So right now it's a circle, but it's emitting it on the edges. I'm going to switch shape to this circle, but smaller. We can actually take this and move it in like that. Cool. So this is going to go, this is what I'm going to use. So this is my dust VFX for when the spring springs up. And like when it springs up, I guess it should go up, down. It should go down, I guess. Down and out. I don't know. Something like that should be fine. Let's just make it also fade out. So color over lifetime and fade out. And so like I said, in this video, I'm doing a really simple version of making particles work. I have a way more advanced one that I will send out as well, probably next week, but also we can also do, depending on how many people join me in the lecture, we can actually work on effects together as well. So this effect I'm going to put underneath this spring, but I don't want this to loop. Right now it's looping all the time. What I want to do is tell it to make that dust when I jump off of it. So dust effect, I'm gonna put this under, actually, yeah, that's fine where it is. I'm just gonna say, set this to 0 here. So now it's underneath this object. And then in my script, I wanna tell it to actually push those particles out. So in here, we're gonna say, let's actually store it. So here we stored an animator. Let's store visual effects. So we can say particle system. I'm gonna call it, no, particle system's fine. If I want to actually assign something to this, I'm gonna need to serialize it. And then with that serialized down here, when I lower the pad, I'm gonna say, this is not gonna make an effect, but when the other one happens, I want it to happen. Yeah, when it goes back up. So let's go, yeah, particle system. And then there's a couple different ways to do this. What I wanna do is say play when this happens. Right now, I think it's set to play by default. I want it to play and then I want it to stop playing after some time. There is another way I can do this, which is called emit, but it's deprecated. I always feel bad when I use this. If I do emit, I can emit a specific number of particles. So I can be like, hey, kick out 30 like right now. But they're removing it at some point. So this is one way to do it, but you can also tell it to like play and stop and that kind of thing. So like we can do, yeah, play and then have it happen. But we would have to then check how long do we want it to play and then make it stop playing after some time. So I'm gonna stick with, you know, the dirty way for right now. So 30, emit 30 when it springs up for now, just to get something going. So this is gonna be kick out particle dust. Okay. So now that I have that stored, anim, the spring. Okay. bounce pad, trigger, particle system, dust VFX, boom, right in there. Not sure why that's not having pin. Okay, so dust VFX is now put in, bounce pad, kicks out dust. This is not playing on awake. Let's turn that off. And now when I jump on it, it's going to kick that out. And I have one piece that I wanted to add to this, which was sound. And then I wanted to show the tag thing, but we'll stop with sound. So this goes down. If I kick back up, dust comes out. Goes down, jump, dust. So now there's a visual effect. There's a screen visual effect. There's a dust visual effect. When it goes up, I have a reaction. If I actually hit space, I say we. I could even put an effect for when the player jumps off of it. It's just layering things on top of this to show that you've done something correctly, the game's responding, that sort of thing. So the last thing I wanted to do on here, and I'm going to turn on the sound of my computer so you can hear it. So let's go share computer sound. Okay, and then I'm going to add on here under FX, I'm going to right click and create an audio source. And then this audio source, I'm going to play when it moves. And so whenever I do like sound, there are things that I could go find and download and use. But instead of doing that, I'm going to do something much quicker, which is just using my mouth and recording something. I recommend you do the same just so you can very quickly iterate on things instead of trying to find the right sound effect. So I'm going to call this Spring SFX. There we go. There's my sound. And then let's kick open Google in here and say record or voice recorder. There's an online voice recorder you can use. I like to show everyone this just because it's super useful. So I'm just going to make like a creak sound and then a spring sound. So we can go creak. That's how important this is. Just getting something to work with, right? So creak. Can't even hear the sound through my speakers. Headphones. There we go. Creak. Yeah, perfect. Okay. And then I'm going to save that out. Here's my creak sound. And then I'm going to do another one. Yes. So this one, we're going to say, oop, I already started talking. Oops. Yes. Spring. Perfect. That's all I need. Spring. Super simple, but I've created something I can work with. All right. Unity. Downloads. Downloads. Sounds. Drag them in. Assets. Close. Okay, so this one, creak. Here's my creaky. This is creak sound. And this is going to be spring sound. Boom. So if I wanted this pad to make sounds, I just need to add that to my script. So script, up here at the top, let's go ahead and store some new things. So store sound effects. We're going to say audio source. Let's just use audio source like that. Okay. And we have two sound effects based on the two things that the spring's going to do. So we've got, say, audio clip. And the first clip is creak clip, audio clip, spring clip. There's our two sounds. Actually, I'm going to change this SFX so I know that they're sound SFX. Save. There we go. That's all I need for my audio source. So when I go down here, if I want to just do on up and down. So here, pad lowers. So we're going to play the creak sound, audio source, play one shot, creak SFX. Cool. That's all I need. Copy this, when we go down, oh, this is exit. This is spring, yeah. So this is going to be spring sound. Play spring. Oop, back that up. Play spring sound. There we go. And then I'm going to put a comment on the other one just so we can see it. Play spring sound. Okay, save. Or play creek sound. There we go. Save. Back out to Unity. Wait for it all to compile. So this SFX here, we don't want it to play on awake. We don't want it to loop. This is actually right now it's playing everywhere. It's not going to change how it sounds if you're really far away from it unless we modify this. So what we're going to do is change this from 2D to 3D. There's a 3D sound, and then we're going to change how it rolls off. If you look down here at the roll off right now, the listener is the player, and this is how close the player has to be to hear it at full volume. As the player walks away, it gets quieter, but this actually never really gets to 0 on logarithmic. So I want to change this to, instead of logarithmic, to linear, just to make it easier for me to control it. And I'm going to say, like 10 units away, I want this to be dead silent. So when I spring away from it, it'll get quieter depending on how high I go. So spring object, go. Sorry, bounce pad triggers, what we're using, particle system and stuff. Oh, I did not serialize. Scroll back up. Serialize this field, and this field, and this field. There we go. And now I can actually modify those on the inspector. Wait for it, compile. There we go. Okay, so sound, spring SFX, audio source, spring sound into spring, and creek sound into there. And now I've got visual effects, audio, feedback, animation, all working with this one, complete object. Creek, so it creaks. Spring, springs up when I get off of it. Creek, spring. And I can change the sound if I wanted to make a different sound when they jump or whatever, but there we go. We've got all these different layers of things happening. And it only took us, 2 hours to make all this work. So the last thing I wanted to talk about, I was mentioning, instead of using tags, use some other system. And so if I wanted to make it so I could place a different object on this and still have it react, I could either check for a specific tag, or I could use rigid bodies or anything like that. So I'm going to create a Gravinal object. Let's go game object. Actually, no, let's go new shape. Just make a box. Cube. I'm going to make it a little smaller, so let's go half size cube. Okay. 5 by 5, build it. This cube is going to be a Gravinal object. And so in order to set one of those up, if you're using mesh colliders, which if you have a cube, you don't need a mesh collider. It's actually much more expensive than just using a box collider. But if you are using a mesh collider and you add a rigid body to it, and then just leave it like that, you're going to get an error. And so to show you what's happening with this, if I hit play, so immediately it falls through the floor. I'm getting an error that non-convex mesh collider with non-kinematic rigid body is no longer supported since Unity 5. If I have any other object selected and I click on this, it'll highlight the object that's causing that error. So just make sure you correct that. So on this cube, I'm going to go set this as convex, which will make this not fall through the floor. And so if you leave mesh collider on a created object, then it's going to yell at you if it's not convex. If you make it convex, it won't fall through the floor. But what I want is not that. the better way to do this is to use a box collider instead. It's less expensive if you have a lot of them. And so there's a box collider. This cube right now, though, is, I don't know if I centered this. Just make sure. Cube. So the pivot's not center. I'm going to hit center pivot, which is going to mess the box collider up for a second, but that's okay. If I then go to box collider, go to the gear, and say reset, now it resets it over the box. And so underneath Scraps tools, scripts, there's Gravinal objects, just drag it over and assign it. And now you get a rigid body and that script on it, and now I can move the object. The reason why I wanted to do this is that if I pick it up and put it on this spring, I want the spring to react. So if I pick up this object and then I put it on this spring, right now nothing's going to happen. So what I want to check for is if any rigid body steps on this, not just the player. Here I'm checking if the player is on it. So here I'm going to say is here is true, and we're storing the player, so let's make sure the player game object is not empty. So and player go does not equal null. So if that object is empty, I'm going to assume that something else is here. It's not the player. So this will only happen if the player is on it. If something else is here, though, it could be anything's on this object. So instead of checking for a tag, I can just look for if an object's on it, period. So let's get rid of this. So on trigger enter, anything enters this. It's not the player, it's just anything. Bounce pad lowers. Store the game object. Here is where we want to change this. So we're going to say if other tag is the player, then we're going to store that. So now it'll only store it if the tag is player. Let's go ahead and fix these. Select all of this, shift tab, there we go. So if anything enters this trigger, something's on it, move it down. If the, keeps doing that. Balls, okay. So if anything's here, the pad will lower. And if anything exits, the pad will lower. So what I'm gonna do is not the player left the trigger, rather, but is here is false. It lowers, plays a sound, etc. But then we're only gonna do this. We're going to exit or get rid of the player after they jump, I guess. So actually we don't need that here. We need to get rid of it up here after they jump off. I guess we can check if they exit specifically. Yeah, but we should still do it here. So let's say if player do does not equal null, I guess, then let's set it. I guess we don't need to do that, but or no, that is correct, because then if the player has entered, we've stored it, and so when the player leaves specifically, we're getting rid of it. So this is remove all knowledge of the player being here. And then we stored it. If it's the player, then store the player for later. So now anything can touch this bounce pad. So play. Okay. And now if I pick this up, put it on top of it, creak, it goes down. Take it off, spring, goes back up. Creak. So now I can use any object on these. Creak, spring, if I wanted to. Spring. Anyway, so that's, kind of sort of just showing all the different ways you can talk to game objects, add sound, add messages, add everything. The last piece was just creating a different way of doing tags. So for this cube here, if I didn't want to use the tag system on this, I could create my own script. So down here, I'm going to hit add component and say DAM_tags, make my own tag system. Then pop into this. And all a tag is just another variable you can check. So like if you make your own script and you want to check your own thing, we just need a variable we can compare somewhere. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this, but just say public string my tag. One sec. I don't know why it keeps showing other videos. Spotlight video. Pin video. There you go. Better. I will be to your message in just a moment. But here I have my own tag on here. Save on the bounce pad. All I want to do is check if a different object is entered or not. So here on trigger enter, I'm going to say if other being the object that's here, if I get component and look for that new script I created, so DAM_tags, and if this is here, so if this, if I get it, let's say just leave it like that. So this means if I did find that component and that is true, that we do have it, then I can check what's in it. So let's say, say DAM tags, D tag, there we go. And we're gonna say that's equal to all of this that we just did. So we're gonna store that script. A little more complicated than using just tag, but you can use this to, when you export your project, you can keep this with you. So check if we, so store it so we have it, and then say if dtag is, or sorry, no, if dtag dot, the variable we created was our own tag thing, so my tag. So I'm gonna say my tag, compare it to another string. So if this is object, we'll call it, then we're just gonna send a message. So we can have the player say something. We had a player message or whatever, or yeah, there we had the emotes and we had messages. So I can just send, I'll have the player message say something. So player message, the object moved the spring. There you go. So it'll only say that if I put an object, a thing tagged object on it. So minimize, and then on this object here, this is going to compile. And so right now my tag is blank. So if I go back here and hit play, just to show the difference. Right now it's blank, so we're currently not seeing the object we want. So if I put this on it, creek, you know, it doesn't say anything, just goes bounce pad lowers, right? But if we change the name of it, or the tag of it, our custom tag to object, then the player is going to yell something when we see that object on it. Pick it up, put it on top, creek. The player says the object moved the spring. So that's how you can check for a custom tag system to see if you put the right object on something or not. So that was everything that I wanted to cover today. It was once again a very long lecture, but I think this one is super important and useful. And we covered looking at core actions, verifying that the player has actually done something, checking it in triggers, checking it on collision, and then we made something with it using all those various things. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now, and then I'm going to open it up for questions for those of you that are here. So thank you for watching, and good luck on your wrapping up of week 1, and looking forward to week 2.